You said I'd embarrass you, so I took the only thing you cared about.
My name is David Chen, and if you asked me to trace the exact moment my marriage unraveled, I wouldn't point to the countless arguments, the subtle betrayals, or even the slow erosion of closeness that had been creeping in for years. No, I'd point to a single morning at Los Angeles International Airport, when 6 little words, spoken so casually, so mercilessly, slammed into me with the force of a freight train. It was the kind of moment that split my life in two, before and after. And strangely enough, that cruel sentence ended up being the most liberating thing that ever happened to me. Let me set the stage. It's Tuesday morning, 6 o'clock sharp. The air still cold enough that my breath fogged as I exhaled into the concrete chaos of LAX. I was trudging along like some unwilling pack animal, pushing 3 oversized suitcases that could have doubled as small storage units. Each bag looked heavy enough to contain not just clothes, but entire pieces of furniture. To be honest, they probably could have housed a family of 4. My shoulders burned, my back ached, and every step made me wonder how Emma, my wife, had convinced herself she needed half of Nordstrom's spring collection for a 3-week content creator trip to Europe. Now, before you imagine me as some saintly husband, happily hauling my wife's baggage without complaint, let's get real. I wasn't smiling, and I wasn't exactly thrilled to be there. I'd been cornered into this role. It wasn't romance that had me pushing that overloaded cart. It was obligation. I wanted to keep the peace, and I wanted to believe I was supporting Emma's so-called career. Emma had been orchestrating this trip for months, and when I say orchestrating, I mean scheming like a Broadway director mounting a massive production. There were endless discussions about wardrobe changes, aesthetic vibes, camera equipment upgrades, and, of course, what she coyly referred to as inspiration funds. Those funds, by the way, translated directly into me funneling thousands of dollars from our joint account into what was basically an extravagant European vacation disguised as professional growth. The final tally? Roughly 15 grand. I know the exact figure because I was the unlucky accountant paying off the credit card bills she treated like monopoly money. That morning, I looked the way every normal person looks at the crack of dawn in an airport. Dark jeans, sneakers molded perfectly to my feet, and an old hoodie soft enough to feel like armor against the chill. I wasn't aiming to impress anyone. Who was there to impress? TSA agents who looked like they hadn't slept in days? Bleary-eyed travelers in sweatpants clutching Starbucks like IV drips? My plan was simple: drop Emma off, maybe grab a large coffee on the way out, hit the gym, and move on with my day. Clean, straightforward, uneventful. But that plan dissolved the moment her friends arrived, Rachel and Victoria. If you've never had the pleasure of meeting women like Rachel and Victoria, let me paint the picture. They didn't just show up to the curbside drop-off at LAX. They made an entrance. It was less traveling with friends, and more starring in their own reality show. Rachel glided in wearing what I'm fairly certain was a designer outfit that cost more than my mortgage. She had sunglasses so oversized and theatrical, they practically deserved their own security detail, and she carried a handbag that screamed exclusivity. An accessory worth enough to feed a struggling family for a year. Victoria wasn't far behind, clicking her way across the pavement in stilettos that looked like they could double as medieval weaponry. She was dragging a sleek suitcase that practically glowed luxury brand, and every inch of her shimmered with expensive jewelry that caught the terminal lights. They radiated the kind of presence that didn't just fill the space. They colonized it. I'd seen them before, of course. They were frequent attendees at Emma's curated networking gatherings, the kind of events that weren't really about connecting, but about being seen, photographed, and meticulously hashtagged. And Rachel and Victoria had this uncanny ability to make you feel like you'd been measured, weighed, and found wanting without uttering a word. They were masters of the silent insult. Smiling faces paired with eyes that ran invisible calculations of your income, your wardrobe, your status. I used to joke to myself that talking to them was like standing before IRS auditors, only they weren't interested in your tax returns. They wanted your soul. So, when their eyes landed on me that morning, I didn't need a transcript to know exactly what they were thinking. There I was, Emma's husband, dressed like a guy who'd just rolled out of bed to load a moving truck pushing luggage I didn't even pack. I could feel their unspoken verdict. Beneath them, irrelevant. An accessory Emma should have left at home. The looks they shared were subtle, but sharp enough to cut through steel. And here's where everything shifted. The real betrayal wasn't their judgment. It was Emma's reaction to it. I watched her face change in real time. At first, she was glowing, excited, ready to show off her European adventure. Then she saw the flicker of disdain in her friend's eyes, and I watched calculation sweep across her features like a storm cloud. She didn't hesitate. She didn't falter. She made a split-second decision to protect her image, to distance herself from me, her husband. The man who had financed this very trip, hauled her ridiculous luggage through the airport, and supported her career dreams, even when they drained me dry. She stepped close enough for me to catch the scent of her perfume, the expensive bottle I had bought her last Christmas, thinking I was investing in our closeness. For a fleeting second, I hoped she was about to acknowledge me, maybe even defend me. Maybe she'd introduce me properly to her friends and point out how much I'd done to make her journey possible. Instead, she leaned in, her voice low, her tone sharp as glass, and whispered 6 words that seared into my memory forever. "Don't walk with me. You'll embarrass me." There it was, the line that detonated everything. No thank you, no goodbye kiss. Not even a polite, "see you soon." Just a cold dismissal designed to erase me from her curated little scene. She wanted to cut me out like an unwanted detail in one of her Instagram shots. Now I could have made a spectacle right there in the departure lane. I could have called her out, embarrassed her in front of her polished friends, reminded her that without me she wouldn't even be boarding that plane. I could have aired every sacrifice, every bill I paid, every time I swallowed my pride while she chose appearances over loyalty. But instead I froze. And then I really looked at her. For the first time in months, maybe years, I saw her without the filters, without the staged smiles. I saw her naked priority system. And it was devastatingly clear. To Emma, appearances came first. Image came first. And everything else, love, loyalty, marriage, wasn't even second. It was nowhere on the list. So I did the only thing that felt right. I let go. Literally. My hand slipped from the handle of her luggage cart, and I watched it roll back toward her like something toxic I'd finally expelled from my body. Then I nodded, calm and deliberate, the kind of nod you give when you know you've reached the point of no return. And I walked away. I left her standing there with her suitcases, her designer entourage, her carefully constructed life. And with each step I took toward the parking structure, I felt lighter, unburdened, as though the chains I hadn't even realized were shackling me had finally snapped. Behind me, I heard her voice calling out, sharp and urgent, tinged with panic. She must have realized too late that she had pushed one insult too far, cut too deeply this time. But there was no going back. Not for me. Too little, too late. The drive back from LAX was the quietest 45 minutes of my life, but not in the way you might expect. There was no chest-tightening grief, no gut-wrenching heartbreak, no soundtrack of devastation playing in my head. Instead, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels almost holy, the kind that comes when a storm finally clears. For the first time in years, I felt calm, like a crushing weight I didn't even realize had been wrapped around my chest had finally slipped away. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was free. Emma had boarded that plane thinking she was leaving behind the same old David, the reliable, predictable man who would dutifully wait 3 weeks, fetch her when she landed, and keep tolerating the scraps of respect she'd been tossing me like table leftovers. What she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that by the time she returned, the man she thought she had safely tucked into his role would no longer exist. Our life as she knew it was about to be rewritten, word by word, chapter by chapter, and for the first time in our marriage, I would be the one holding the pen. That was the fundamental thing Emma never understood about me. In 4 years of marriage, she somehow missed it. She thought I was a nice guy. And here's the problem. I'm not nice. I'm strategic. There's a world of difference between those two. Nice guys bend over backward, smiling as people step on their necks, and then wonder why they're always gasping for air. Strategic men? We keep records. We catalog every insult, every dismissal, every moment when someone reveals their true nature. We don't react immediately. We bide our time. And when the timing is perfect, we act with precision. So while Emma thought she was reducing me to the role of chauffeur/luggage handler that morning, what she didn't realize was that my brain had already kicked into military mode, calculating, planning, moving 3 steps ahead. Because here's another thing she never really grasped. Before college, I spent 6 years in the military. I learned how to keep my head clear when chaos was exploding all around me. I learned the distinction between a tactical retreat and outright surrender. And I wasn't surrendering to Emma. Not that day. Not ever again. Take her beloved SUV, for example. That black Escalade she adored, the gleaming status symbol she drove around Beverly Hills for brunches and photo ops, that car wasn't ours. It was mine. Every signature on that paperwork was mine. The title sat in my name, bought and paid for with my money, my credit, my effort. Emma liked to pretend it was theirs, our marital property, her glamorous accessory, but she never looked closely enough at the details. Assumption had always been her game, and she was about to learn just how dangerous assumptions can be when they collide with reality. The same went for the house. We'd been living there for 2 years, and she paraded it online like it was her personal palace. What she failed to remember was that the down payment came from my grandfather's inheritance, money that had nothing to do with our marriage. On paper, legally, officially, it was mine. She had poured endless hours and obscene amounts of my money into redecorating it, treating every wall, every corner, every piece of furniture as though it were just a backdrop for her content machine. I looked around one morning and realized our home had been nothing more than a movie set for years. The living room wasn't built for living. It was staged like a sterile furniture catalog, all beige and white, impossible to relax in. The kitchen didn't smell of meals and memories. It smelled of ring lights and electronic cords, more studio than place to cook. Even the bedroom, our supposed sanctuary, was rigged with professional lighting so she could capture herself from flattering angles at all hours. It struck me then with brutal clarity. I hadn't been living in a marriage. I'd been living in her production studio. So sitting in the driveway that morning, engine humming beneath me, I made my first decisive move. I picked up my phone and called the Cadillac dealership where I'd bought the Escalade just 18 months earlier. The man on the other end perked up instantly when I mentioned I was interested in selling back a low-mileage luxury vehicle. Within 20 minutes, I had an appointment on the books and an offer range that almost made me laugh out loud for the first time that day. The transaction went through smoother than silk. Luxury SUVs apparently hold their value exceptionally well when they've been babied by an influencer who drove them mostly to yoga studios and overpriced Beverly Hills brunch spots. By the time the paperwork was signed, I was holding a check for $38,000. Sure, it was $6,000 less than what I'd paid, but let me tell you, seeing that number on the slip of paper filled me with more satisfaction than I'd felt in years, because I knew exactly what that check represented. A surgical strike. The first crack in the empire Emma thought she'd built. With momentum on my side, I dialed my buddy Jake, a real estate guy who knew the area like the back of his hand. Not because I was selling the house. No, that was mine, and I fully intended to enjoy it once I purged it of Emma's Instagram perfect nonsense. But Jake had connections. Specifically, he knew the best junk removal crews in town. The kind of professionals who didn't ask unnecessary questions when you told them to clear out 3 rooms full of designer clothing, makeup, and props by tomorrow morning. Let me guess, Jake chuckled after I explained what I needed. Emma finally went too far, huh? Something like that, I replied. I need someone reliable, no slip-ups, full discretion. Everything that doesn't legally belong to me needs to be gone. By sunrise? I've been waiting for this call for years, Jake admitted. I know just the guy, Tommy. His crew's solid. Cash only, but they'll handle everything. Cash wasn't an issue, not with that fresh dealership check burning a hole in my pocket. The beauty of clarity is that it makes every decision feel clean, almost effortless. While Emma was reclining in first class, posting selfies about how grateful she was for her big adventure, I was already dismantling the foundation of her comfortable little world, piece by piece, with nothing but my own resources. Right on schedule at 8 o'clock the next morning, a box truck pulled into the driveway. Out stepped 3 men in matching uniforms, built like they'd been carved from oak. The crew chief, Tommy himself, had steel gray hair at his temples and forearms the size of tree trunks. He surveyed the living room, Emma's meticulously staged cathedral of beige, and let out a low whistle. Man, he muttered, shaking his head. Your wife's got expensive taste. Ex-wife, I corrected, even though no court papers had been filed yet. And yeah, she burned through money like kindling. We walked the house together, room by room, while he jotted notes on his clipboard. The instructions I gave him were simple. If I bought it, inherited it, or had a hand in choosing it, it stayed. Everything else, the clothes, the props, the ridiculous furniture chosen for Instagram likes, was fair game for removal. The physical clearing of the house turned into an all-day event, and I have to admit, it was strangely therapeutic to watch 4 years of Emma's curated, picture-perfect world vanish piece by piece into the belly of Tommy's massive truck. It felt almost ceremonial, like stripping away layers of a costume that had been suffocating me for years. Her walk-in closet, for instance, looked less like a place to store clothes and more like the aftermath of a Saks Fifth Avenue detonation. Row upon row of designer dresses hung on velvet hangers, many of them still bearing their tags because Emma had bought them for specific Instagram shoots, worn them once for a picture, and then promptly forgotten about them. I watched in silence as those same dresses were packed up and hauled away, each one representing another slice of money and energy I had poured into her illusion. The bathroom was another shrine to excess. The countertop resembled a Sephora stockroom, overflowing with enough serums, palettes, lip kits, and luxury skincare jars to bankrupt an average household. Half of them were freebies, gifts from brand partnerships or PR packages, but Emma's spending habits had turned the counter into a glittering wasteland of waste and vanity. Tommy's crew cleared it out methodically, box after box, until the marble counter finally reappeared like an archaeological find. And then there was the guest room, or what used to be a guest room. Emma had converted it into her private production studio, complete with ring lights, high-end cameras, and tripods, positioned like military artillery. One entire wall had been painted in what she proudly called millennial pink, though I always thought of it as a Pepto-Bismol nightmare. That too disappeared, equipment and all, leaving behind bare walls and open space. Even the furniture she had insisted on buying for her aesthetic was loaded onto the truck. Out went the stiff white leather couches that photographed beautifully but felt like concrete when you sat on them. Out went the fragile glass coffee table that couldn't hold a cup of coffee without Emma shrieking about water rings. Out went the bizarre accent chairs that looked like modern art sculptures and felt like you were perching on jagged rocks. Watching them disappear wasn't just satisfying. It was healing. While Tommy's crew tackled the physical dismantling of Emma's world, I handled the digital side. That was where my years of military training in systems and logistics paid off. The military teaches you to look for connections, dependencies people overlook until it's too late. Emma's entire online empire, her influencer brand, was built on shaky digital foundations. She had never bothered to separate her accounts properly. Out of habit, she had tied security questions, recovery emails, and backup contacts to me. To her, it had been convenient. To me now, it was an open door. I started with the joint financial accounts, checking, savings, and credit cards. I changed passwords, revoked her permissions, and established new accounts under my sole control. This wasn't theft. Emma didn't actually have money of her own to steal, but I wasn't about to let her burn through my resources while she sipped champagne in Europe and posed for selfies. Then I moved on to her prized possessions, her website, her Instagram, her YouTube. She had spent years cultivating the illusion of a perfect life, built on carefully staged images of our home, our marriage, our vacations. What she never realized was that I had helped set up her infrastructure 2 years earlier, and I was listed as administrator on more platforms than she probably remembered. I didn't delete anything right away. That would have been sloppy and possibly incriminating. Instead, I quietly assumed control, locking down back-end systems, ensuring that every post and every update was now subject to the silent gatekeeper, me. By the time the sun began to sink behind the horizon, Tommy's crew had performed a miracle. The house was unrecognizable. The guest room echoed again, ready to become my workshop instead of Emma's content stage. The bathroom looked like it belonged to a real person instead of a beauty influencer drowning in PR samples. The bedroom finally resembled a space for rest, not a broadcast studio littered with light stands. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine, not a museum curated for strangers online. That night, I stood in the living room as the light faded, gazing at walls free of motivational quotes and surfaces no longer buried under cameras and ring lights. Peace, that elusive, long-forgotten feeling, settled over me. My home was finally a home again. The very next morning, I treated myself to the kind of errand that would have made Emma roll her eyes. I drove down to a furniture store in Redondo Beach that specialized in pieces built for comfort, not Instagram aesthetics. They sold sectionals you could actually nap on, coffee tables that didn't crack under the weight of a pizza box, and chairs designed for relaxation rather than photo ops. The salesman, a middle-aged guy named Steve, probably thought I'd lost my mind. I was grinning ear to ear while testing out recliners and running my hands across sturdy oak tables. After years of living in a sterile photo shoot set, even something as simple as buying a couch felt revolutionary. I walked out of that store with an order slip for a sectional sofa, a solid wooden coffee table, and 2 armchairs built for lounging, not posing. 3 days later, the entertainment arrived not in the form of furniture delivery, but in the mailbox. A thick, official-looking envelope from the law offices of Patterson, Burke, and Associates, complete with embossed letterhead and an air of pompous importance. Apparently, Emma had run straight to her parents, Richard and Helen, who wasted no time hiring their families' go-to attorneys to handle her crisis. The letter was a work of art in its own ridiculous way, a patchwork of legal jargon, posturing, and hollow threats. It demanded everything from spousal support to restitution for emotional distress, and my personal favorite, the return of all marital assets to their proper shared status. In short, Emma had convinced her parents and their overpriced lawyer that I was a financial abuser who had locked her out of her own life. I took the letter to the back patio, cracked open a cold beer, and read it twice. Once for the details and a second time for the comedy value. The language tried so hard to sound intimidating, but anyone with half a brain could see it was fluff designed to scare me into compliance. The dramatic ending was the best part. Failure to comply with these reasonable demands within 10 business days will result in immediate legal action. I actually laughed out loud at that one. And then I did what I always do when I need to separate fact from theater. I called Graham Morrison. Graham had been my attorney since the day I purchased the house. A seasoned pro in his 60s, Graham had built his reputation on real estate and family law. He was blunt, sharp, and allergic to nonsense. He didn't waste words and had zero patience for intimidation tactics or frivolous threats. When I called Graham that afternoon and read Patterson's letter to him over the phone, I could practically hear his exasperation radiating through the line. He didn't even bother to hide the disdain in his voice. "David," he said dryly, "this is amateur hour. They're bluffing. Every single one of their so-called demands collapses the second you apply actual law. Your wife's name isn't on the deed. The Escalade is titled exclusively in your name. And last time I checked, changing locks on your own property is not a criminal act. They're grasping at straws." That was all I needed to hear. 3 days later, Patterson, Burke, and Associates received Graham's response by certified mail, and it was nothing short of a masterclass in legal precision. If their letter had been a firecracker of empty noise, Graham's was a scalpel. Clean, sharp, devastating. He opened with the basics. Certified copies of the house deed with only my name listed, the car title proving sole ownership, and documentation showing that every joint account had been closed in compliance with federal banking regulations. That alone would have been enough to shut down their theatrics. But Graham wasn't just trying to shut them down, he was out to bury them. The real brilliance came in the itemization. He presented a meticulous, spreadsheet-style breakdown of every expense I had covered throughout our marriage. Mortgage payments, property taxes, utilities, insurance, car payments, maintenance, repairs. And then came my personal favorite entry, the $18,000 Emma had burned through on her European influencer trip, all paid from my pocket. In neat columns, Graham illustrated exactly how Emma had lived rent-free in my house, funded by my income, while contributing nothing of her own. The grand total came to around $75,000 over 4 years. And then came the eliminate shot, the final paragraph. Mr. Chen welcomes your client's proposed lawsuit and is prepared to file an immediate counterclaim for unjust enrichment, conversion of services, and compensation for 4 years of uncompensated financial support. Estimated damages, $200,000, plus attorney fees and court costs. Reading that paragraph, I nearly stood up and applauded. It was brutal, professional, and airtight. The silence from Patterson, Burke, and Associates after that letter was deafening. No phone calls, no second letter, no settlement conferences, no deposition notices. They folded faster than a bad poker hand, leaving Emma stranded with her tantrums and no legal ammunition. Meanwhile, Emma's carefully curated online life began collapsing in slow motion. Her follower count, which she had nurtured for years until it reached over 50,000, started bleeding numbers by the hundreds every week. The angry rants she initially posted about betrayal and abandonment vanished quickly, replaced with half-hearted inspirational quotes about new beginnings and healing after toxic relationships. The engagement was pathetic. No one cared anymore. Her glamorous European companions, Rachel and Victoria, evaporated from her feed as if they'd never existed. Their own Instagram pages scrubbed her from their lives entirely. Apparently, standing by a crumbling friend wasn't compatible with their personal brand strategies. Loyalty didn't photograph well, so they abandoned her too. Fast forward 4 months, and I was sitting in what used to be Emma's content studio, but was now finally my workshop again. The room had been reborn. Sturdy workbenches lined the walls, proper lighting illuminated the space, and my tools were organized in perfect order. I was putting the finishing touches on a custom dining table I'd been commissioned to build, a solid oak piece destined to outlast its buyers. The irony wasn't lost on me. In just 4 months of focused carpentry, I'd made more money than Emma had ever managed to scrape together from her influencer career. Because here's the thing. People pay good money for quality work built to last, not for a filtered photograph of something fragile and fake. Emma, on the other hand, was back at her parents' house, living off Richard and Helen's charity while posting once a week to the sad remainder of her audience. Her content, stripped of financial backing and technical polish, looked amateur, almost pitiful. The numbers kept dropping. The comments dwindled. The empire had turned into rubble. Last week, I booked myself a 3-week trip to Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. Places I had always dreamed of visiting, but never could because Emma's content schedule always dictated where, when, and how we traveled. This time there would be no schedules, no curated outfits, no frantic selfies, just me, free to explore on my own terms. One evening I sat on my back patio, a cold beer in hand, watching the Pacific catch the last orange light of sunset. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading tomorrow. I wasn't bracing myself for criticism, guilt, or another round of Emma's performative crises. I was actually excited about my future. It was mine again, unfiltered, authentic, real. Emma had believed she married a man who would endure anything, who would always stand quietly behind her no matter how badly she treated him. What she never realized was that I had been watching, keeping notes, and waiting. I wasn't the pushover she imagined. I was the strategist she underestimated. She wanted a life that looked flawless in photographs. I wanted a life that felt genuine in reality. And on that morning at LAX, when she told me not to walk beside her because I might embarrass her, she handed me the freedom to choose substance over image. She got the life she curated. I got the life I built. And I can tell you, substance wins every single time.